A presidential candidate survives an assassination attempt. The ordeal serves as a rallying cry, and the candidate cruises to victory in the aftermath. It sounds like a simple story, but the reality is more complicated. Indeed, despite the political framing that will inevitably come from the alluded-to event, there are some reasons to think that the effect on the election will be surprisingly muted given the circumstances. Maybe something like a shift of 7.5%. Now, there are a lot of other things that we could be talking about today instead, including how we were only 2 inches away from a very different story, the coincidence inside of the would-be assassin's name, what his underlying motives were, which probably won't be as weird as the ghost of William McKinley told me to do it, or an attempt to get Jodie Foster's attention. And yes, both of those are real. I also will not discuss the unlucky spectators, what this says about the current US political climate in general, the possibility of copycats, the rampant yet unsurprising misinformation that circulated in the immediate aftermath, gun culture in the United States, the failures of the Secret Service in letting a man with a rifle get to a rooftop only 400 feet away from a presidential candidate, or the protective shields that we will soon be seeing around both candidates until November. I also won't entertain conspiracy theories. Do you know how hard it is for even expert marksmen to hit a bullseye from 400 feet? Never mind the very tip of an ear, especially given that we have a picture of the bullet in flight, thereby confirming that a bullet was actually fired? Anyway, my sympathies go to those affected and their families, especially the person who has perished. I am only recording this now because Trump survived, and the outcome of the election matters a great deal for international politics, a topic that I have previously focused my attention on, and would much prefer continuing to do so, rather than this nonsense. Oh, and I'm also focusing on this because political violence is one of the main topics that I research professionally. So, with that, let's default to the 800-pound elephant in the room, what this means for November's election. As a starting point, we should go back to that simple story from earlier. Basically, we are looking at a rally round the flag effect, except it is not a flag that people are rallying around, it is a person. Trump looks like a strong survivor, and so, by the theory, the following election in November becomes a cakewalk. And we do, in fact, have research that indicates that this can happen. Actually, it is quite a bit of research. A recent iteration of this that might illustrate the point was the 2018 stabbing of Jair Bolsonaro, a month before Brazil's election, and his son quipping that he just wanted to send a message to the thugs responsible. They just elected Bolsonaro president. One slight wrinkle to this, though, is that Biden is the incumbent, not Trump. And in times of crisis, all else equal, voters tend to prefer maintaining the status quo to minimize disruptions. That is why the White House is releasing photos like this one, showing Biden in the Situation Room and trying to exert control over the, situation. But in the case of an assassination attempt on the challenger, it is hard to see how this would do anything but help Trump. Still, the narrative that November's election is now a done deal is just wrong, and it completely ignores the closest historical parallel that we have. Let's turn back the clock to 1912. This tangent with surprisingly high relevance is the tale of Teddy Roosevelt, who had left the Oval Office just 3 years earlier. Dissatisfied with what the incumbent had done in the meantime, Roosevelt began running for president one last time, and caused a schism in the Republican Party in the process. On October 14th, he was in the middle of giving this speech here, and shortly after this photo was taken, Roosevelt was shot, not in the ear, but in the chest. Blame the ghost of McKinley for prodding the would-be assassin to commit the deed. Miraculously, though, TR survived in large part because he was carrying around a 50-page speech, and penetrating the sheets slowed down the bullet. Because he was not coughing up any blood, Roosevelt deduced that the bullet had not reached his lung, and continued on with his speech before seeking medical treatment. And with all respect to TR for being a man among men, and no-selling what this gun doled out, he promptly lost the election to Woodrow Wilson. There are obvious differences between today and back then. As a starting point, the 1912 election was a competitive three-way race, and with apologies to Robert Kennedy Jr., that is not the case today. But even still, victory in November's election and the right to control this pot of gold is not a foregone conclusion. Not by a long shot. Turning to the betting markets, Trump's chances jumped 7.5% in the aftermath. For a basis of comparison, Biden's poor debate performance increased Trump's chances by about 5%. Weirdly, though, Biden's odds also went up by 0.1%. So what the heck is going on here? Well, Harris's chances dropped by 4.8%, and some of the dark horses also fell off. Thus, what the markets are guessing here is that the assassination attempt is going to make Biden less likely to pull out for whatever reason. And it just so happens that the betting markets think that Biden is much less likely to win, conditional on being the final nominee, than the other possibilities. Harris actually has a 14-point lead in that regard. You can further see this by noting that Biden has taken a much worse hit than Harris has. Indeed, he is about 10% more likely to be the Democrats' nominee, though please bear in mind that these numbers are changing rapidly as I am writing. But in any case, the total odds at the time of production look like this. So yes, Trump is looking good at the moment. But another way to phrase the central puzzle of this video is why Trump's odds have not gone up further. And that takes us back to the chalkboard. One issue here is that we do not really know how shocking events like this operate in the current political environment. You'd have to go a long way back before finding a more polarized time in the United States, well before any of us were born, and the modern media is fundamentally different from then to today. If most everyone is already locked into their particular candidate, then even an event like this one would not have as much of an effect as it seems it should. Then again, it will only take a handful of votes in a few swing states to change the election's outcome. Will surviving an assassination attempt influence moderates' choices? Well, that is something to look for in the polling data over the next couple of weeks. And if it is about simply getting out the vote, will it mobilize Trump supporters to stand in line to cast their ballots rather than stay home? And even if so, will pro-Biden or pro-Harris voters be galvanized to go to the polls as well, because they are concerned that the Republicans will be doing the same? That being the case, the effects simply wash out. But that raises a follow-on problem. We are in July right now. These fireworks are from just 9 days before the assassination attempt. Meanwhile, the election is in November. Whatever feelings voters have about the situation right now will have to sustain over that period for them to matter. I ask you, what was happening in presidential politics back in March? If you can't answer that, fear not. I did not actually know off the top of my head either. I did some research, though. Besides a visit from Ireland's head of government, and way too many sugar cookies being produced, my search of the White House archives reminded me that it was the month of the State of the Union address. Remember how that was a high-energy speech that earned Biden praise, and how much has changed since then? Now, the assassination attempt is the biggest story of the election so far. The point is that it is not going to have the same effect as if it had happened on November 1st. Finally, we get to the Polish experience, and the possibility that assassination attempts can backfire for the assassin. In 2019, the longtime mayor of Gdansk was assassinated by stabbing while attending a charity event. It subsequently dominated the Polish news cycle. About half of articles published in the aftermath mentioned him. But the event did not turn into a political windfall for the opposition party that he was working with, nor did it turn into a disaster for the country's ruling party. In the aftermath, researchers found that negative campaigning immediately following the assassination, for example, saying things like, "The current government is bad and responsible for this," sharply reduced voter engagement for the candidates saying such, and sentiment dropped more among voters watching partisan news coverage. That is, the people more likely to be exposed to the negative messaging. Now, Poland is but one country, and this was but one assassination. And it was successful. But the suggestive lesson here is that it is better to take the high road. Don't blame the party in power for the incident. Rather, adopt a messaging campaign of political unity in a time of crisis. Obviously, that is not the standard operating procedure for the Trump campaign. However, at least in the immediate aftermath, Trump's social media posts have ramped down the rhetoric. He is instead focusing on the positives, patriotism, and the collective goodness of the American people. He also sent a retruth of Melania's message that was centered around family and political unity. Notice not a single mention of Biden or the Democratic Party here. And it is easy to tell a story where the assassination attempt makes Trump more electable, but not as a direct effect of the incident itself. Rather, part of what has driven moderates away from Trump is his, at times, divisive rhetoric. Imagine that the shooting serves as a wake-up call to Trump that such messaging will lead to further attempts. In other words, he is seeing what happened, and accordingly, he updates his beliefs that it could happen again. If Trump wants to maximize his self-preservation, then we may see a pivot toward that sort of messaging in his overall campaign. That could, in theory, get some moderates to come back to him, which might then allow him to cruise to victory as Democrats squabble over who should be their nominee. But if these posts are not indicative of the future, then we may see a repeat of the Polish experience. If you want to learn more about what cutting-edge social science research says about what is happening in current affairs, check the playlist on your screen. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.